Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Knockout. This movie tells the story of a retired boxer trying to help a new student targeted by bullies. While learning to box and stand up to his tormentors, the young boxer must learn to overcome his tumultuous past. Will he manage to become the best boxer in his school? Let's find out in Knockout. Knockout begins by showing a young man named Matthew who has just moved to a new place. That morning, Matthew is escorted by his mother, Christine, to his new school, where he meets a young man named Nick. After school, when Matthew was packing things in the room, his stepfather, Jacob, came to him. Jacob asked about the poster of a boxer Matthew had displayed. He then told Jacob that it was his grandfather when he was still fighting in the ring. After retiring as a boxer, he now works as a referee. The next day at school, Nick runs into Matthew along with a girl named Ruby. Nick and Ruby then invite Matthew to join their group, where the two try to convince him that their group is the coolest group in school. Even so, Nick put conditions on Matthew before joining. He asks him to seduce a cheerleading girl named Teresa. Even though it was a little awkward, Matthew worked up the courage to say hello to Teresa. But then, Teresa's boyfriend, Hector, arrives angrily and pushes him to the ground. That night, while reading a book in his room, Jacob came to Matthew and gave him a book about the life journey of a legendary boxer, Muhammad Ali. Matthew was so happy to get the book that he took it to school. But then, Hector and his friends stopped Matthew and poured drinks on the book. When Hector was about to bully Matthew, a janitor named Barnes came to intervene. After Hector and his friends left, Barnes, who saw the book about Muhammad Ali brought by Matthew, suggested he take boxing classes at school. While looking at the boxing class schedule, Matthew was again visited by Hector and his friends who intended to bully him because previously Barnes had blocked him. However, Nick came to help Matthew, until finally a fight broke out between Nick and Matthew against Hector and his friends. Arriving home, Matthew then begged his mother to sign a letter of consent so that he could take boxing classes at school. But Christine refuses, worried that her son has never studied martial arts before and doesn't want him to get hurt. Not at his wit's end, Matthew then faked his mother's signature so he could take boxing classes. The next day, Matthew attends a boxing class at the school gym, where the class is coached by a former professional boxer named Harward. Harward announced to his students that there would be a boxing fight between schools every year and each school would send 2 students as representatives. He said he had appointed 2 students, namely Joe and Hector. Knowing Hector is also taking boxing classes, Matthew immediately feels hopeless and intends to cancel his intention to practice boxing. But Barnes managed to convince him to face Hector valiantly. Harward summons Matthew and Hector to fight in the ring during the first practice match. Because previously Hector had intended to bully Matthew, he did not waste the opportunity to beat him in the ring. When Harward blew the whistle to stop the fight, Matthew instead hit Hector and the two got into a fight, which resulted in Matthew being expelled from boxing class for violating the rules. After everyone had gone home, Matthew was then approached by Barnes who tried to cheer him on. Barnes then revealed to Matthew that he was a former professional boxer who was quite famous. But his fame has knocked him from the pinnacle of success because he became very arrogant and always underestimated people. Barnes then showed him the trophy he won in the boxing championship. This then motivated Matthew to become a boxer. Seeing Matthew's sincerity, Barnes then taught Matthew some punching techniques in boxing and even lent him his boxing gloves. Matthew then resumed physical training after school, where he revealed to Barnes that his grandfather was also a former professional boxer. Unexpectedly, Barnes was quite familiar with the figure of Matthew's grandfather as a fellow boxing athlete. Matthew then begged Barnes to continue to train him to become a great boxer like his grandfather. Barnes then agreed but asked him to continue prioritizing his studies at school so that his academic grades remained good. Matthew then agreed. Long story short, Matthew started his training with Barnes. First, he had to start exercising physically every day, then practice various punching techniques on Barnes. One day, Hector comes to Matthew and says that Harward gave him another chance to take the boxing class. At first Matthew didn't want to because he had been training with Barnes, but Hector kept reassuring him until he finally agreed to come to boxing class after school. However, upon arrival at boxing class, Matthew only saw the whereabouts of Hector and his friends, and did not find Harward anywhere. Joe says that Harward will be here soon and asks him to get into the ring and fight Hector. Turns out it was all planned by Hector, where he just wanted to beat Matthew in the ring. Not long after, Barnes came and tried to help Matthew. Just as Barnes is about to beat up Hector, Harward appears and tells them all to get out of there. After the incident, Harward, who did not like the presence of Barnes in his class, then went to the man and asked him not to intrude on his territory. Harwood favors Hector, the best student in his boxing class, and mocks Matthew as a weak geek student. Hearing this, Barnes became annoyed and asked Harwood to let Matthew and Hector fight one more time fairly. Harwood, who confidently thought that Hector would win easily, then accepted the challenge. Barnes then approached Matthew in the library and said he would fight Hector again in a boxing tournament. Matthew was also very surprised to hear that because he didn't want anything to do with Hector, who often looked for opportunities to bully him. But Barnes continues to reassure him with a series of motivational quotes that had proven to have helped him get back on his feet when he was in a slump. After listening to Barnes' advice, Matthew becomes motivated to get back up and defeat Hector, and most importantly, overcome his fears. Matthew then practiced boxing more vigorously and enthusiastically again in the following days, especially when Barnes said they would train at a boxing gym that his acquaintances owned. But before that, Barnes told Matthew to ask permission from his parents before entering the boxing championship by signing a consent letter. Matthew again forged his mother's signature because his mother never allowed him to take boxing classes. After undergoing training at the boxing gym for some time, Matthew was even more excited, especially after he managed to beat one of the best students in the boxing gym in a practice match. Matthew couldn't find Barnes anywhere the next day, so he decided to train alone. After school, he was surprised by the presence of the principal at his house. Principal Lee informs his parents about Matthew forging parental signatures to enter the boxing championship. Hearing this, Christine was very angry with her son because she had been against Matthew's desire to take boxing classes from the beginning. Principal Lee then said he had fired Barnes for allegedly influencing a student to enter a boxing championship without his parents' consent. Matthew insisted that Barnes didn't know anything about him faking his parents' autographs because it was all done by him of his own free will. After all, he was determined to become a great boxer. After knowing the reason why Barnes left, Matthew tried to apologize to the man and asked his friend where Barnes was at the boxing gym. He finally finds Barnes on a ship and immediately expresses his regret for everything that happened. After hearing Matthew's explanation, Barnes forgave Matthew and asked him to continue the match against Hector. But Matthew refused and said that he would only participate in the boxing championship accompanied by Barnes. Again, Barnes advised Matthew not to depend on others and to rely on himself. Barnes tells Matthew to face his own fears because only he can overcome all his fears. Even though Barnes will not accompany him later, now Matthew has regained his confidence and is determined to win the championship. Long story short, the day of the match arrived where everyone looked excited for the exciting battle between Matthew and Hector. After being convinced by Matthew that this boxing match is very important to him, Christine and Jacob decide to witness and support their son in the boxing championship. Nick and Ruby also came to cheer for Matthew. While getting ready in the locker room, Matthew was approached by Barnes, who would witness his fight live in the stands. Once again, he re-motivated Matthew before the game started. Matthew's grandfather, Charlie, unexpectedly, comes to support his beloved grandson. The fight began. In the first round, Matthew received a barrage of attacks from Hector, but could still be restrained by him. During the break, Charlie approaches Matthew at the side of the ring and encourages his grandson to attack Hector. But in the second round, Hector did not allow Matthew to attack and continued to beat the boy. Seeing this, Principal Lee then asked Barnes to accompany Matthew on the side of the ring. Without thinking, Barnes approached Matthew and tried to inspire his fighting spirit with a grapevine of motivational sentences to raise his confidence. After receiving motivation from his coach, Matthew became more confident and was able to land a punch on Hector's face, causing him to fall. It didn't take long for Hector to get up. However, before Hector could make an attack on him, Matthew had already punched Hector hard in the jaw and the match was over. Although everyone cheers for Matthew for his success, the judges decide Hector is the winner because he gets more points from his attacks. However, Matthew receives praise from everyone, including Harwood, who underestimated him. Harwood said that Matthew had the mentality of a champion and invited him to rejoin his boxing class. The film ends by showing Matthew, who has to part with Barnes because he has decided to move out of town, but he wanted to watch Matthew fight first before leaving.